Well, Val, I'm glad to be back with you today. This is good. People have been picking up and finding our podcast.
Yeah.
A little bit more than I expected. I thought it would take a lot longer, but I appreciate everybody that finds us sharing it, and it's been fruitful, I think.
It is, and it is also an encouragement for us to continue doing it. So.
Yeah, because if we're going to go through, and I know the first one I thought, I'm amazed that we're able to do this because we try so much, especially recording media at City Church is hard because there's so much going on. Yeah. And I was shocked more than thrilled that we were able to get it done. So I'm glad.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure and a very pleasant time, when we get together and had a chance to talk about our ministry and what God is doing through our ministry and in our ministry. Yeah. It's a blessing.
I think today, we had talked about sharing some stories because there's stuff at City Church that, we have cameras that we carry with us because, from the very beginning, we realized people just don't know that our end of town exists. And I remember years ago being on the phone with, there was a group of youth ministers, and they were putting together a ministry event, and I was there basically to represent the youth from City Church. We're a multicultural church, and they wanted our input, and it was going to be held in our park. And I never forget, I brought up, the need for transportation, and we need to feed, and we can take care of that, and at this concert and everything. And this youth director just lit into me and said, there's no, these kinds of problems you're talking about don't exist, basically accusing me of just making it up. And I thought, why don't you just, the dude was like less than 2 miles from us, and he was blind to it. But from the very beginning, we would take cameras with us, and we've told stories of ministry. I know a lot of people have seen our television program. I know now we're bringing those stories digitally on our website and on YouTube and stuff. But, there are things that we see, I know, that shape our perspective and shape the way we approach the ministry that we just can't put a camera on.
Right.
It would humiliate the family. Yeah. It wouldn't be appropriate. It's not the right time. Mm-hmm. And frankly, there are times that we're so busy ministering to a family that's in a critical need that it's not about documenting it. But at the same time, there are those moments that I find myself wishing, man, I wish we could take our supporters with us, or I wish, I'm aware as the executive director of what people are giving, and I just wish, man, I wish so-and-so who gave, sacrificially in order for us to buy food this afternoon, I wish they could be here to see this. And so today, I just wanted to share, you and I take some time and share some of those stories that are too real to show, but that maybe we can talk about that really happened, and give our supporters and our volunteers more of an idea of who we are, because we minister in a different area. The north side of Amarillo is not, it's, I don't want to use the word segregated, but it is. It's different than the south side.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And I don't blame those who do not sometimes have a hard time believing in the stories that we tell, because I don't blame those people. It's really hard to believe that. In the United States, there are people living in a such situation.
Yeah.
Especially from an international man. If you talk to some international people, they will never believe it. They say, no, this is not USA. USA is a rich country. Not in America, But so that's why I don't blame those. But there are some very hard stories that people will never know, and I think that would be a great opportunity for us to share with them some of those stories. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you one that shaped for me. It woke me up, and it was. We actually, people, I know they don't realize, because unless they were there 15 years ago, it's just not something we talk about a lot. But our family planted the church by actually living in the upper floor. We actually personally bought the building. Now, since then, we've given that building to the church. So, but we bought that building and moved into the upper floor of that building. And so we were located down there. And that was the only way at the time we could afford to be down in downtown Amarillo. And Polk Street was not like it is right now. You know, there were only a couple of businesses other than the big anchor, you know, like the bank was down there. There was a couple of like oil and gas businesses that had their offices down there, but there weren't the shopping wasn't down there. This was before all that. And so in our minds, we thought we had our minds wrapped around where we were at, but as close as we are, I mean, it's kind of funny to say now because we're only like 6 blocks from the boulevard. But I had not yet crossed over into the boulevard, and we had lived down there a couple of months. And so I do sympathize with folks that like lived in Amarillo all their life and are like, well, how do we get downtown? Like, well, yeah. But I'm working in there at the time, and we were doing construction. And there was a group of these homeless guys that were coming in and out. Our doors didn't lock at the time. So they would just wander in and out, and we would talk to them and eat lunch with them, make a sandwich. And they came in, and they were both just drunk as they could be, and completely drunk and stumbling over themselves. But were real upset because they were hungry. And I said, well, where do you live? And they said, it's such and such apartments over on the north side and off 17th Street. And so I thought, well, at the time, we had just had a grocery store give us some produce and a few other little things. So I go in this room that really wasn't even a pantry. It was just an area where we stored this stuff, and I put them a box together. And in my mind, I was young, and in my mind, I thought, I'm going to get these guys out of my hair. These kids are going to be showing up, and I'm trying to mop up after my construction mess. And at the time, we might have had 20 kids showing up. Wow. And so I put this box together with these groceries. We didn't have a van or anything. And they said, well, we can't carry this to where we live. We need a ride. And I thought, man, these guys are driving me crazy. And so I said, okay, we'll hop in. And we had a borrowed Suburban is the only vehicle we had. So I put them in that Suburban, and they head off. Well, they lead me over there into North Heights off 17th Street. And we turn left there on Hughes and 17th, and we go to the Hilltop Apartments. Well, at the time, those were even rougher, you know, than they are now. And these guys get out of this apartment. I'd never been over there. And they bail out into this apartment parking lot. Well, there were kids that were just had their legs dangling out from underneath the second story, you know, and were just nothing to do, nowhere to play. And they saw them with those groceries, and they started to pour out of those apartments because they were so hungry, and started taking the food out of these guys' boxes, and they were drunk and trying to make their way up into their little apartment they were living in. So it shocked me. I mean, there were more kids there than I just had no idea looking at that apartment unit that many kids could pour out. So I go back to the church, and I told my dad at the time, I said, hey, what do we have here? These kids we got to take some more food. And we loaded up everything that wasn't nailed to the floor. I mean, if it was available and edible, we took it. And we, in that one single apartment unit, just using food that for us had just been given to us, we had nothing to work with. We pulled 80 kids the next week by sending over people and volunteers in their vehicles to bring 80 children off that one little street back to City Church for our Bible club that we were holding at the time. And I felt personally really convicted because it was not my plan to go find children that afternoon, but it broke my heart that I came that close to shooing those guys away, and the Lord used them to get my attention, and that became my van route. I went over there every week for a couple of years, and at the time, those roads were dirt roads. People in Amarillo might not realize that those were not paved over north of the boulevard, over in North Heights, but it taught me I need to be really careful because it's a little bit like the Gospel of Mark. Everywhere Jesus goes, he's interrupted. You know, every time he ministers, he's coming from a ministry, some kind of help that he gave somebody, or he's headed somewhere else and he's interrupted. And that's how it is. The need just catches you off guard. Yeah. But two things. One, we realized how important it is to love children and how important it is when you go into those neighborhoods that where we work, to love the kids. They're ready, but too, how much of a felt need food is.
Yeah.
Hunger is real.
Yeah. And it's a learning experience for all of us working. And I also remember my first year here, 2019, my first summer serving at City Church. And I remember going out into the neighborhood to deliver the lunches for the kids once they were out of the school. So, and I remember it was me, my wife. We have a group of people with us, and we were just knocking doors.
Yeah.
And I remember I went and I knocked this door, and two little ones came out. So I say, well, I have some lunches for y'all. And then the mom came out, and then I handled the lunch sack to the mom, and she grabbed the lunch, and then she looked at me and said, where are you guys from? And then I said, well, we're from City Church. And she looked at me and say, oh, you are a bunch of hypocrites. I was
Hypocrites.
I was shocked. I said, oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of with no reaction. But then the first thing that came to my mind was to, just answer and say, well, we are a bunch of hypocrites, but you're eating our lunch. And I guess she also was shocked. She was not expecting that. And she just said, oh. And she went back to her house, and I was offended, but on the same token, I said, well, I don't know what the kind of experience she have had in the past with any church, and also I said she might be having a rough day. I don't know, but the reality, even if she was just being mean, there were two little kids in the house, and I was kind of being careful and stopping by, and I decided to not do that. But by the end of the summer, I decided to stop it again, and I knocked the door. The two little ones came out, and they grabbed the lunch. She didn't come out. Long story short, it's been now 5 years that I've been serving the same neighborhood. On the second year, 2020, during the COVID, I remember I went back to her house, say, I cannot skip this house because there are two little ones. So I knocked the door. They came out. She came out as well. She didn't apologize, but the way that she greeted me and Leisha, my wife, with a smile on her face, and when we handled the lunch sack to her, she grabbed it, and she appreciated it. She said, thank you so much. We really need it. My kids need it. And she has been sweet as she can be all of these years. She now has 3 little ones. And every summer we stop by. Their kids is interesting because, during the summer, they are the ones that at that particular time, usually 10:30, they will be outside. They will be on the porch waiting for us. They know that we will be there for them. It has changed the whole context, the whole story of that family, and even mine. I learned the experience. Initially, I was shocked, and on myself, I say, I will never stop at his house again. Her kids will starve. It's depending on me. But I was so wrong. The kids is our goal, and the mom was just having a hard time.
Well, in City Church too, we talked about this with some of our newer staff. I mean, the reality is that we've had situations before where kids would come to church and fight each other on the front porch, and we've had kids come and steal. We've had parents come that were high on drugs and confront us. I don't know if any of that had anything to do with that particular mother, but we do have, I'm sure there are people that we have people that get mad because we won't give them a bus ticket to Denver, and so there's no telling what got her. But you're right. That's the reason why we're constantly in the neighborhood, because we don't know it all, and there are people that are hurting, but ministering to the children in that house, gave you another opportunity to earn their trust back and to remind them who we are.
They I can tell everybody has their scars, but the neighborhood where we serve, I can tell that they have a little more scars, in my personal experience saying that, okay?
Yeah.
They have a little more scars than, most people do. And then we have to show some compassion.
Yeah.
We have to be a little more patient. And we cannot give up on them. Reality is, because if we do that, they will continue suffering. The message that we are sending is, okay, if the church is for me just when I am okay, just when I am in a good mood, so why do I need the church if most of the time I am not in a good mood?
Yeah.
I'm struggling. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do for my kids tomorrow. They don't have much hope. So the beauty of our ministry is to learn how to handle situations like that. Do not take anything like personal, and understand. So it was just a rough day. So it's gonna be better tomorrow. And there are some others that they don't care. They tell, you don't have to stop here. I don't want it. That's fine.
That's fine.
So, but the majority, they really need the ministry of the church.
Yeah. I think it underlines too the need for a different kind of church. I mean, the amount of discernment that you have to use in ministering, because and now I'm grateful because we've challenged the parents to get involved. For so many years we really didn't have many parents coming, and so when a child would become violent, or we would have to take a child home for one reason or the other, we can't discipline kids at City Church. The only thing we can do is take them back home and diffuse the situation as best we can. But there wasn't a parent there committed to bringing the child back and saying, hey, what's going on? Let's work this out, And so that's the unfortunate thing, that, the responsibility has been on our shoulders to do that. And if there wasn't a church that allowed volunteers and teachers and youth workers to have that kind of understanding and to have that kind of slack, it could really be discouraging. Years ago, one of the things that really woke me up, but also kind of helped me have a little more perspective when it came to our young people, it was one girl in particular. And one of the things that I've seen change over the years, she was living in what we call an adult motel. And I need to explain to people what I mean by that, because in 97, when we went down and planted City Church, of course, the airbase closed down years ago. And all of the motels, most of them on the old Route 66, which is now, part of it is there on Amarillo Boulevard that led into town. All those older motels used to have on the sign outside, they would advertise free pornography, and it would say free XXX videos, and there would be prostitutes out front. And so we called them adult motels because that was the only reason why they were still there. And I don't know what changed. I noticed one year, I don't know if it was a concerted effort on the part of the city or if somebody just began to buy those up and do something more with them. But at the time, there was, over on the east side, there was a family of 4 kids, and they were living in one of those. And the mom was prostituting, working as a prostitute out in the parking lot on the boulevard. And then the kids were inside. My mom and I went over and because we always kind of go in pairs when we go out and work. And we invited the kids to come and realized they were completely hungry. They weren't in school. They had just moved to Amarillo. And so we went and got a box of food. One of the things, though, I won't ever forget, that night we were picking kids up. So we said, well, would you want to come to City Church tonight? And of course they said yes and everything. Well, they took the Kool-Aid, the little drink mix that has blue Kool-Aid and red Kool-Aid. That night when we went to pick them up, they had taken the Kool-Aid out of the packets and used it to dye their hair. They were little blonde-headed kids, and so they all came with red and blue hair, and it was all sticky, and I don't know what they were thinking. But so they came, and we began to work with the mother, and they began to get their life back together. But one afternoon, the mother she had gotten arrested and then, of course, kicked out of the motel. She stayed in a shelter for a while and was kind of able to get sober. And was able to get a little HUD house, and she had waited. And my mom and I went over to check on the family, and the older girl was like 15 at the time. And I'll never forget, we went over to check on her, and she's sitting on the front porch. The house doesn't have any drapes, nothing covering the windows, no furniture inside. It was a little 1-story, maybe 600 or 700 square feet, little bitty 2-room house. And the front door was open, the back door was open, and you could just see clear through the house. And the girl was crying on the front porch, and we went up and talked to her. And what had happened in her mind, she was in that shelter. She had been in that adult motel. The kids, I remember her 2 little brothers had contracted scabies, which is a parasite from that adult motel. And so that was part of why the mom was motivated to get into a shelter. And so the girl in her mind had the expectation that when they finally moved out of the shelter, they were going to move into a nice, clean, furnished home. And I'll never forget, she was crying because the only thing her mom had dropped her off there, and she was trying to sweep up the little house. And the broom that she had was broken. The handle was broken. It was about, 3 feet long. And she was trying to clean up that house and didn't have anything to work with. And it just broke my heart. And I thought, here, this little girl, if we would have dropped her off in anywhere else in Amarillo, the perception would have been that they loved living that way, or at least that they had grown to tolerate it, But they didn't. They hated it, and she desperately wanted out of that life. And we went back over with some cleaning supplies, and the mom showed up, and they were able to get some furniture and things that people donated, and we were able to kind of get them back on their feet. But it really made an impression on me that it made me want to work harder, because here this young teenage girl did not want to live that way. And I thought, she's at such a critical time in her life. If we're not here in her life helping her right now, she's just going to repeat the cycle and give up. And I think the Lord sometimes pulls the curtain back and allows us to see, so that when we're more informed and more sensitive, because we do deal with a lot of real rough situations, and the tendency is to become hard-hearted to those things, and to become insensitive.
It is hard, but the Lord is the one who has the power to change those stories.
Yeah.
And then, we definitely need to step in.
Yeah.
And do whatever takes for us to do it. And then that is something that I appreciate about the ministry that we are doing here in our town.
Val, I know sometimes we think in our minds it would take a huge ministry, like especially churches think, well, we got to launch a new program. Sometimes it's just like as simple as being available to the Lord and letting the Lord use us. And, I know I love your little neighborhood, and you run. Tell our folks where you're at is, because it's east. It's downtown.
I'm downtown east. Yeah, that's my area.
So you're not a half mile from City Church.
No, I'm not. I'm not. No, and I love that part of the town.
Yeah.
I know most of the people there. It's 5 years going to the same place. Of course, they move a lot, but the majority of them are there from the very beginning when I start serving that particular area till today. So, and I love that place.
It's a sweet bunch of families over there.
Yeah. And Donnie, I have so many memories and stories, and I remember not too long ago we were talking to one of our best friends, you and I, and he's a kind of a wise guy, helping us to see some things that we could not see. And I remember that he was asking us a bunch of a question, and then in midst of that I decided to ask him a question, and I asked him, well, when was the last time that you went to the north side? And he was surprised. I think he was not expecting being myself questioning or asking him a question, and so, well, he didn't know. So and then I know that this is a reality for many people who are watching our podcast right now, listening to our podcast right now, they have no idea what happened on this part of the town. And there are so many needs, but also so many beautiful things happening that we needed to share and let people know. And I would like to share one story that, to me, like you said, it shapes our view of the ministry. And I remember it was 2020 when we had COVID and all stuff. And I remember that fall break, we decided to deliver lunches for the children, and also take advantage to start enrolling children for Christmas. And we went to our route, and I delivered the lunches. And then my wife and I decided to cross the boulevard to the other part of the town.
Yeah.
And when we were driving by, we saw this group of kids just playing in the yard. And we decided to stop. We had some extra lunches. We decided to stop, and we delivered the lunch to them. And I called the dad. The dad came out, and then I told them about our Christmas project and enrolled all the children. Long story short, the Christmas... during the Christmas, when we went out to deliver the Christmas box, I packed that box for those kids. They have 7 kids. 4 more of their own, and they were fostering 3 for the mom's sisters.
Oh, my
kids. And then we packed 7 boxes, and there is this little one, 2 years old girl, and Ligia and I, we decided, and I remember I talked to you about buying some tricycle for the little one, and then you said, oh yeah, do it. So I went to Walmart and I grabbed this tricycle, and then I put on my truck. So we went to that house and we delivered the box. I left the tricycle for last, to be the last one. And then I called the little one and I said, I have a gift for you. And I pulled the tricycle out of my truck and I gave it to her. Donnie, the dad was, I saw tears on his eye. And then I asked him, so what's going on? And he said, well, I need to share this with you. Last night, he said, we went to Walmart to buy some groceries. And we were buying the groceries, and my little one, she saw a tricycle like this. And she, ran towards that, and she grabbed it, and I let she play in a tricycle inside of the store. Reality, Donnie, I haven't seen so many kids doing it in the store, and they play. My son used to do it. We would let him play inside of the Walmart, and by the time to go say, son, it's time to go, leave it. So he would leave it. So, and he said, and she played with the tricycle, but the time to come home, she was just sad, and she cried because she wants to have the tricycle. And he said, but Pastor, I can't afford for that. We couldn't. We were just buying some groceries, and we couldn't afford it. And now you, without knowing anything, you just show up and you leave it this for last and you give it to her. So he was, he had some emotion and tears on his eyes. It was a beautiful, beautiful story. It, to me, is, I had no idea. But the Lord, he knew that little one, and he showed some kind of a love for that little kids. And to me, it's a blessing when we are available, when we are willing to do something. God will give us the direction that we need. And that family, we developed a great relationship. We talked. I still have contact with them. But anyway, it's just a kind of a story that if you do not tell, people have no idea. Know.
Well, and I think the question people have is, why are you having to help families with lunches? Is there something illegal going on or something? There are those situations, but like in that situation, it was a hard-working family. They just had to take responsibility for another family full of children that they were fostering, and and they're at Christmas struggling, and during the summer struggling to feed them. A lot of our families are that way. The mom will be a single mother; she's working, but she might be a support system for a sister or a cousin who all of a sudden drops, a 2 or 3 year old off at her house. We found grandmothers that have, I remember one on our lunch route that, she's got over a dozen children she cares for every single day. And you go up and the level of commitment, she's doing everything she can, but she's just trying to keep the little kiddos alive. Yeah. And she's doing that so the mothers can work or work and go to school. It's I think sometimes the church is an error because it drives, maybe if they're brave enough to drive and kind of take a windshield tour and drive through the neighborhood, we see the things in the yard, we see the things from what we can see driving down the road, and we think in our minds, I've got my mind wrapped around this problem, and we don't at all. We have no idea what's going on behind those closed doors, and we don't know what those families are dealing with, and frankly, we don't know how simple it would be to make an impact. We joke around because, sometimes we've had children come and the one thing they really needed was a door on their house. We had a family in St. Jacinta that had a blanket over the door where the door went. They had no front door. And I told a couple of our people, and they're like, that's not so. That little boy doesn't know. And we went over to do a home visit, and they came peeking around a blanket. they were there in St. Jacinta with no front door. And, you'll have children that'll come, and everything, their whole world would be changed if they just had underwear or socks, Well, I have a picture that I carry on my phone, actually, and I was sitting next to this boy who was notoriously naughty. He was just a handful. He was about 6 years old, and at the time that I took the little photo, but he would drive his teachers crazy at school, and then during COVID, his mother just didn't enroll him, so he wasn't in school, and I would go by and take school books that we would pick up at the bookstore and stuff, and just try to give him something to keep his mind engaged. And of course we report that and try to get the mom to enroll him, but she just didn't. But he came to church and was causing all kinds of grief. And so what we do at City Church, if people don't know, if you're in trouble, you have to sit with us, with our families. And so he was sitting in between Shanda and I was talking to him, and he put his little foot up, and the whole bottom of his sneaker was gone. His foot was literally hanging out of his shoe. And I took a picture of it to keep on my phone, just to remind me that, hey, sometimes we make these snap judgments, and this little dude, all he needed was a pair of shoes. It's in the middle of the winter, and he has the appearance of the shoe on the top, but nothing underneath. I had a little girl in my vid one time and was bragging. She was riding around with Shanda and was she had just moved from Florida. In fact, Shanda and she doesn't live in Amarillo anymore, but she's an adult now, and we just had a conversation with her a couple of days ago. A real sweet young adult now. She's about 24. But when she was young and coming to City Church, she practically lived up there when she lived in Amarillo. And we were talking about what our talents were and everything. And we were encouraging the kids and kind of asking them, well, what are you good at? And she said, and she at the time had just moved from Florida, and was in between, and she said, I'm good at walking barefoot on broken glass. And I said, what? And she said, yeah. She said, and she was sincere. She was just a little elementary age little girl, and she was totally sincere. She said, I walk so much on a barefoot, I can walk on broken glass. And she said down in Florida, they just walked on the street everywhere and didn't have a car. And her claim to fame was she could walk on broken glass barefoot. and they're just, who would deny that child, because of the level of physical need they have, doesn't have the right to hear about Jesus?
Yeah.
But the reality is, the choices that we make as pastors and committees and church leaders, we're putting up barriers. And the truth is that, there are a million small decisions that we make as God's people that really do keep those children and hold them at bay. And it is overwhelming. The need is overwhelming. I mean, right now, tonight, you and I are going to minister at City Church in a building that really, if we were setting it up for Bible study, it would be set up different. Right. But it's a giant cafe, you know. We have a huge amount of square footage that we use for kitchen. And if we were just going to cook a meal for 100 people, we could have a small galley-style kitchen. But we're going to have to cook thousands of meals and deliver those meals, which means it's got to be fresh. It's got to go out in a couple of hours. Well, you can't do that unless you have prep rooms and kitchens and space to do that. I mean, I get it. But sometimes I know when the church thinks, well, nobody would pay that price or make that. Well, we did. And I think if people are wondering, is there a church that worries more about the kid with no shoes than they do having new seats in the sanctuary? Yeah, that's the City Church does. And we've made those choices. And I think that's not a calling that God has only given City Church. I think God has called all of us as God's people. And it never ceases to amaze me. Just when I think I've got my mind wrapped around the situation, the Lord just rings my bell, and you know.
Well, we see those churches that comes, especially during the summer, they come to serve with us.
Yeah.
Well, it proves that this is not a privilege for City Church. It's not one work that only City Church is doing. There are tons of other churches that are supporting us and are doing the same work, and we couldn't appreciate more. But you're right. The problem is when we are more focused on our buildings than we are focusing on the needs that people have outside. When we are so concentrated in our own needs as a church, and we do not look outside to see the needs of those peoples in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I am so thankful for the work that we do here, because it's different. You know, it's different, but it's a work that is available for every single church in our town. And we appreciate those who cooperate with us.
Yeah,
we have
absolutely.
some good sister churches here in town that help us, and some others that come from the outside that help us. But our goal as well is to set an example.
Right.
Right? It's to show, hey, if we can do it,
right,
y'all can do it.
Well, and that's why we, frankly, deliver on bicycle routes. That's why we do a lot on foot, just to show that, because people may not realize, and we're already gearing up. In a couple of months, we'll have 1,000 kids come through that'll be trained, college students, high school students, young adults, and families in mission work, local mission work, and we put them on bicycles and we lead them out on bicycles so that they can. And we've had churches that wanted to do similar ministries, but in their mind they thought, well, we need hundreds of thousands of dollars for a van fleet. We need, and it was just as simple as showing up with your bicycles, taking some newsboy bags, you know, that you'd put newspapers in to deliver the newspaper, putting some lunches in them. And they've started whole ministries. We've even had church plants started because they saw how easy it is. But I mean, easy, it's hard work, but it's not difficult in a sense that it's impossible. And I think that there's something in the DNA of every Christian that is really frustrated when it's not able to obey the Great Commission.
Right.
And the gospel has power. You know, one of the first groups of young men, God used them to really, I think, teach me the power of the gospel. And because I was at my wit's end, and at our first year, we didn't actually pick up youth because we were so overwhelmed. We had hundreds and hundreds of children coming, and we were very limited. And this was over 25 years ago. But my dad, we recognize we have a lot of kids, we're missing a lot of youth. And so he asked me at the time, he said, would you focus on the youth? And I said, sure. And I didn't know what to do. And I picked them up, and they would fight, and I would haul them back and forth to City Park and back to City Church. My job at that point was to try to keep them from killing one another while their little brothers and sisters were in Bible club. And but then I remember we would take basketballs and speakers, put on some Christian hip hop music in the park at Sandy Center Park, and they would shoot hoops, and we would have a little Bible study. And I mean little Bible study. If I could hold their attention for 5 minutes, I was thrilled to death. But we were very aggressively trying to make sure we were faithful to do that. And I'll never forget, after about 6 weeks of just that frustration, there were 13 of those boys in particular that really, it's like a light went off. They understood. And all 13 of those young men separately over the period of a couple of days came to know the Lord. Mm-hmm. And it blew me away. And I never expected it, because they were, I mean, frankly, they were very intimidating. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have anything at the time. We didn't have any materials. We didn't have any resources to record anything. Like, normally what we do now is we record their decisions so we can counsel with them and follow up with them. And we didn't have any of that back then. The only thing I had a little New Testament that I carried in my back pocket, and I wrote all of their names down in the cover of that New Testament. Mm-hmm. And about 8 years later, of course, those young men were in high school at the time, and they grew up, and a lot of them moved to Lubbock and Houston and got jobs and went to trade school and stuff, but they still pop in and check in with us. But my wife and I were in San Jacinto delivering lunches, and I was on my bike, and one of the young men from the neighborhood, Benny Dilworth, pulled me over in a car. And I immediately recognized him, but he had moved down. He actually graduated early, if I remember correctly, but he went down and learned how to do HVAC work or electrical work or something, but was real hardworking kid, really did well, loved the Lord. Anyway, I hadn't heard from him in years because he had moved away. Mm-hmm. And apparently he had come back to Amarillo, pulls me over there with Shandon, and said, "Hey, come over here." And I went over and talked to him, and there he was there with his wife. He said, "I just want you to know that God really came into my life and changed my life, and I've been living for the Lord." And he said, "Let me introduce you to my wife." And then he had 2 little ones in car seats in the back seat of his car, and they were all there together, and I was like, "Oh, thank you, God." But the coolest thing of all was I happened to have that New Testament on the dash of that my car that morning, and I had taken it with me into the neighborhood, and so I was able to show him, where his name was, and I just thought, man, the Lord really makes it that there's not a thing in the world anybody could have done with money or influence to bring about that change in that young man's life. There wasn't anything that we did or said. It was literally the power of God that was real, that changed his life. And, that's what fuels us. That's why tonight, we're recording this on a Wednesday. Tonight, you're going to have a counseling group. I'm going to be teaching a Bible study. Probably won't have a ton of people in my Bible study, but I'll tell you, the ones that are there are there for the right reasons. Our youth are going to be meeting. We've got choir, and our worship team is getting ready for Sunday morning, and they're growing. I mean, and what fuels all that? We know the Lord's changing their lives. These are whole families coming to know the Lord.
And this is the purpose for the church in the earth. So we have to be ambassadors here, and give people a chance to hear the word of God. And when I mean hear the word of God, reality is people need to hear it without sound, without noises, because most of the time church think that sharing the gospel is just open the mouth and quoting scripture and telling the Bible. Reality is people, they want to see more through our actions. They want to hear more the word of God through our actions than through our words, you know. And then it's something that everybody can do. And people cannot put the difficulties before the try. They need to go, if they are willing to do something to the Lord and share the gospel to those people, I just want to tell them to be sure that the Lord will provide for all the needs that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to pull the curtain back a little bit and thank our supporters, because the reality is we have the freedom to go and help anybody that has need because of their support.
Right.
If we had to justify who we were reaching based on how much money they were able to give to the church, it would never work. And City Church is a church, and it is a vibrant, dynamic, spirit-filled church. It's a multicultural church. But you and I have the freedom to look any human being in the eye that wants to know the Lord and offer them the hope of the gospel, because we're not their money is the last thing that we want. And that freedom, I just want our supporters to know that's not something we take for granted. It is a gift. There's a lot of difficulty that comes with it, because sometimes people get busy, and sometimes the mail gets quiet, and sometimes, like right now, we're transitioning into a time where we're not, our audience has moved from television to online, and we're moving with it. But that transition takes time, and we're having to find our audience, and we're communicating in 3 or 4 different main areas. But I just want to thank people, because if they weren't being faithful, this just wouldn't be possible. And it's not a job that we could do with a few dollars. It's a commitment that, when we're looking at investing nearly $100,000 just on top of our normal operating budget in the next few months over the summer, just to take care of the children, to learn who they are, to minister to their families, to make sure they don't lose hope. So I'm very, very grateful for that support. I know. Well,
without them, we will not be here sharing all these beautiful stories.
Yeah, from day one they've been there. Well, I hope that they're blessed by today. And Val, I'm glad you're here, brother. Yeah. Having a brother working along in the ministry that is wise and has discernment is a rare thing. But I'm glad you're here.
Well, I appreciate that, Donnie.
Well, thank you.